I'm here with Brigadier General Tammy Smith, who is the Director of Human Capital with the U.S. Army Reserve. General Smith, thanks very much for joining us.
I am glad for the invitation to speak with you today.
So, been spending a lot of time going in and out of the family forums and listening to some of the generals, higher-up generals, talk about the various programs that there are. And one of the things that I got out of this and got through researching a book that I did on military fathers was that people in the reserve don't always know what's going on in the way that they should. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. We are a community-based dispersed force. We don't have access to Army installations the same way you think of a traditional member of the military being inside a gate at a regular installation. So there are in that inherent challenges for how you get information out about our programs and what families can access for themselves.
So how do they start that process? Because I would hear over and over again that, we're the only family, only military family in the zip code, and our kids are the only military kids in the school, and the teachers have no idea what to do. And so we'll get into some details, but where do you start referring people?
Yeah, and that is absolutely true, and just the way that we're set out, that you might truly be the only military family in that particular zip code or in that school. Which kind of makes you an army of one out there. But the way that we get that information out is just like we think of in our active component, is that we start with our family programs. It's just that we've got a different delivery model. So within our family programs, rather than having that one building that everyone knows that you go to Army Family Services or whatever your service may be, we do a lot of it through our virtual portal, and we do it through our Fort family. So we have a telephone number, in a sense, that people can call, that even if they don't know anyone else to ask, they can call Fort Family in the Army Reserve, and there'll be people standing by to help them, whether it's something to do with their mortgage, a parenting issue, whether it is something to do with mobilization or yellow ribbon pay, any type of question that might be family related. That's always a good starting point.
Oh, it sounds like it, yeah, because I think that, the idea of having to go to a base, if you're a couple hundred miles away from a base, that can be a rather big obstacle to overcome.
Oh, absolutely. Not only from a travel perspective, but a lot of times even when you go to the base, they'll say, "I'm glad you're here. Let me sit you down at the computer so we can help you solve your problem." So the virtual approach works well for our military families. Now we still have, I would have to say, even having the virtual approach, you still have to have ways to get that information out to the families. So there always has to be a live person involved. And we try to do that through our family programs and through our regionally aligned programs. We are community-based, but not necessarily state-based like the National Guard. So we do a lot of our programs through our regional support commands and do it on an area basis.
Okay. And so you mentioned that it's kind of like a phone number or a website. So where is that? How would somebody begin to start that process?
I'd go to the ever-powerful Google. And the Army Reserve.
We're all going to be replaced by Google.
Then go and put in Army Reserve Fort Family.
Fort.
Yeah.
Fort like
Yeah,
Fort
just-
Bragg.
Exactly, like Fort Bragg or Fort anything, but it is Fort Family. So Army Reserve Fort Family. And what that will do is it'll bring up the Army Reserve Family Programs website with the link to the Fort Family. And it's got a 24-hour human staffed telephone number that soldiers and family members can call, and then get referred to those type of support activities that are in their region.
So I was listening to General Talley a while ago, and he said something that I think is probably going to strike fear into a lot of people's heart. He was saying that because of the current situation, some of the family programs funding is perhaps being looked at as something that can be cut. What do you think? Do you think that's really going to happen?
Well, I think that as the leaders go through just the decision process about when we have only so much money in the budget, there will have to be a prioritization that is made. But I think that in the reserve, we, in some cases, almost have an advantage because we're community-based, and so already a great deal of our support comes from those programs that are offered by military service organizations, veteran service organizations. So in some cases in our services, depending on how connected we are to communities already, it will merely be a blip So I think that we're actually well postured with our delivery model to maybe have it be less impactful in the reserve than it will be for a military installation where they're used to going into like a in-person delivery service.
Okay, so tell us a little about some of those programs that are available, and what's your favorite program?
I have to say that one of my favorite programs that I've seen is the youth program for teenagers. And they've got this wonderful program for youth leadership development that where the kids are brought together and they are taught leadership courses, they're taught resiliency skills, and they are taken to a place. I attended one that was here in Washington, D.C., so they had an opportunity to visit the nation's capital, and there's a educational element of it. But one of the really wonderful parts of it is that they get to interact with other Army Reserve kids. And so it's one of the few times where they maybe come together as youth and they get to interact with kids who are similarly situated, which they may not get in school. They may be that only person in the school like we talked about. And they, of course, don't have that installation. So I think that that's a really strong program for bringing our youth together in a way that then they develop the connections. They follow up on Facebook. They keep contact with each other, and they know that they've got a peer support system after that experience.
So you said that they're being taught resiliency and other things. Who's doing that teaching? Is that somebody within the military, or is it one of the civilian organizations?
For the Army Reserve, it's within our Army Reserve family programs. So we have trained instructors who work with that program, and they will actually come to the site where we have these teen camps and teen panels, and they have a standard sort of like program of instruction that they bring for the kids, but they are focused on resiliency, on the communication skills, and giving them a better understanding sometimes about the responsibilities that their parents have as members of the reserve, so they can kind of put that in a context of their life and everything else that's going on with what their parents are doing.
So we're in a situation, fortunately, that we're drawing down the troops and the size of the Army shrinking, and I would imagine a lot of people who joined the reserve for the educational benefits and weren't expecting to be deployed will be happy that their life can return to normal. But how are things going to change within the reserve as we get smaller?
Well, I think that they're going to change in a way that we're going to get more creative. And some of the things where we have used money to put programs into place, and it makes it easy, you just show up. I think what we're going to find is that our leaders are agile and adaptable. And so things such as resiliency and coping skills is that we're going to start being able to deliver those better in smaller units because, one, there'll be a need to, and I believe that we have the leadership to be able to adapt and do that at the local level. So there'll be some change, but I think it's actually, we're going to have to stretch a little bit, and I think in some ways it's going to end up making us stronger because we're going to have to critically think about the best delivery models, and I really think that we have the skills to do that.
When people come back, some of them are going to be able to stay in, and some of them they won't be able to stay in because, again, the shrinking size of things. Are the people who leave, whether voluntarily or not, are they going to be eligible for some kind of continuing services, or would they have to go through the VA to get, just thinking perhaps of TBI or PTSD?
Those programs already exist for the transition when you leave the reserve to be able to access VA type of activities. One of the populations I'm actually focused on is that as the active Army draws down, and we know that they're coming down to 490 at this point, is that as they draw down, there's a transition that is they're going to have to make. Many of them will choose to come into the reserve, and we want them to do that because we want to retain that talent. But from a family's perspective, we're going to have perhaps an increased number of people who make that transition in the next couple of years because they want to retain maybe their retirement benefit or some of their health care benefits, just the connection to the uniform. And I think that we are going to, as part of that creativeness, is that we're going to have to be able to help those military families make the transition into civilian communities, because that's going to be the transition I think that will impact us the most from a family perspective, because I think our numbers when the transition over the next year are going to be greater than they have been in the past years from an accessioning point of view.
Is there a little friendly competition for the people who are going to be leaving active between the National Guard and the Reserve?
We don't think of it that way. Is No, no. I mean, we don't think of it as a competition. Is that there are requirements in both the Guard and Reserve. The Guard is basically, or for the most part, combat formations. We're combat service support, and so of the transitioning populations, we're not in direct competition for the same military occupational specialties. So we don't think of it as a competition. And as they go through the transition point, the transition points are actually staffed by both Guard and Reserve in the same transition point. And so there is the opportunity to learn about both the Guard and the Reserve while going through that transition. Some people are happy. I know I want to stay an infantryman. That's all I want to be. I want to stay in artillery. The Guard is the best path for them. And then there'll be some of those infantrymen who go, well, I thought about being a medic. And they could go in the Guard, but there's also opportunities reserved for that. So we don't think of it so much as competition as that there is a place in one or the other of the components as they make that transition.
So our listeners are all over the world, which where AFN broadcasts. What do you tell somebody who's just a 22 years old and their first deployment has not even a deployment, they're stationed in Germany or something in a completely peaceful place? What do you tell them about what the future looks like for them and their family and being able to have what they need to have?
Well, I think that there's going to be truly some uncertainty and that they should keep themselves informed. They should listen to shows like this. They should keep track of Army news. They should keep track of what is in the current events so that they can have a true understanding of the complexity of what's going on with our nation and the size of our military. And then I think that everything that they do should be about informed choice. And when you go through, if they choose to leave, or if in some cases perhaps they have to leave, maybe there are too many of a particular skill set and they're asked to leave active duty early, through informed choice, I would ask that they learn a great deal ahead of time, and also especially their spouses too, about the benefits in the Army Reserve, is not to lose what they have invested already towards a retirement that they can get at age 60 if they continue on, the health care benefits, and again, just that staying connected to the uniform so it's not such of a culture shock also as they transition back to a civilian life.
So we talked just a little bit about TBI and PTSD. What kinds of things are available for the surviving Blue Star or Gold Star families because they have really not the connection anymore? They're going to miss the entire thing. What's available for them?
Well, within the Army Reserve, we have survivor outreach programs that are part of our Army Reserve family programs, so we can keep connected to those families in that way. And of course, we have all of the wonderful veteran support organizations and MSOs that are out there, such as TAPS and such. We keep close linkage with that, and always remembering that in our case, we remain community-based. So in many cases, our distributed community-based outreach programs, including those civilian veteran service organizations, are sometimes the best thing because then they can provide that support locally.
There seem to be a lot of organizations these days that are getting involved in spouse employment. There's Jill Biden and Michelle Obama have got the joining forces, and there's a number just on the trade show floor that are helping. Can the spouse of a reservist take advantage of some of those programs, even though they're not necessarily going to be moving anywhere?
Oh, absolutely. That is open to them. Not only the programs, of course, that fall under the umbrella of joining forces, but also within the Army Reserve specific, we've got an employer partnership office. And within that employer partnership office, we reach out to transitioning active component to reserve component individuals who are transitioning. And also, if you're just a currently serving member of the reserve, you can contact a regionally aligned employment specialist, and they can help you with your resume. They can help you have access to jobs databases. I mean, it's really kind of a hands-on, and they can walk you through the process, help you perhaps go to a seminar for free that helps you with your interviewing skills, and all that is available to the spouses of members of the reserve.
And is something similar available for the reservists themselves? And there's so much talk about spouse employment, and now a lot of people are hiring veterans, but that transition from somebody who has been deployed for a while, who comes back not the same guy that he was when he left, helping them to perhaps transition into some different kind of a job where they may, they may be physically able to handle it, or even psychologically, just they may need something different. So are those kinds of things available for the returning vets themselves?
Oh, absolutely. The employer partnership office was actually stood up to be that transition, is to make that connection between civilian employment and also the transitioning military member. And in some cases, it is a case of we know in our current economy, perhaps they came back, and even though our laws protect a member of the reserve, it could be that the company simply doesn't exist anymore. But the employer partnership office helps to connect them with a new job in their area. And one of the things too that we find is that when a soldier comes back from a deployment experience, is what they find is that they've sometimes outgrown the job that they left, and they come back with greater leadership and a greater sense of responsibility. And what they found is that even though it was a great job when they left, now they're looking for something more, and the employer partnership office is there to help them again with their resume, their interviewing skills, and to do a broader outreach for something that perhaps will align them with more responsibility.
There's just this thing that happens when I'm interviewing a lot of reserve guys. They come back from a deployment or even from a weekend away, and somebody says, "Oh, you've been off playing soldier?" And do you have, as part of the training, the job training, something, I mean, it may sound silly, but something that can help them deal with people who just don't get it?
Well, one of the things within the employer partnership office is that we try to educate the employer. And so it's an outreach to the employer. And we educate from an employment standpoint and interaction with the Human Resources Department about what it means to be a veteran, and about some of the skills and what is different about coming back as a veteran. I think the outreach to the employers is really important. And of course, that helps everyone. That's not only for the Army Reserve, but that helps our transitioning active component. It helps the Guard. It helps everybody to understand better what that veteran's experience is. So I think that portion of the outreach is absolutely vital to creating that common understanding that you mentioned.
You mentioned that there are legal protections for job-wise, and just thought back to something that General Talley said, which I thought was sort of funny and kind of sad at the same time. He said that there was a question that came up of how come some people are deployed more often than other people. And he gave it a good answer, but then he said there's this little element of people who are volunteering for deployments, and they aren't telling their spouse, and they aren't telling their employer. Does that same legal protection exist if you're volunteering for a deployment, as opposed to if you are deployed because of that's the needs of the service?
I hate to guess, but I know that some of the legal protections, because each of those cases you describe, and I say I hate to guess because I don't know each of those particular scenarios, but generally speaking, a individual is protected and can have reemployment rights for up to 5 years if they go on active duty. And there's also a provision in law that if you are called to active duty, that when you return to your job, that you return to the same job, or at least to the same level of responsibility if that job has been eliminated. What perhaps General Talley, not having heard his exact explanation, is what we're finding is that there's a great deal of goodwill among American employers about our reserve members going and having to deploy and support our nation. But then the question comes up is, say, boy, they've been gone 3 times. And sometimes it's just not clear to the employer about what was that involuntary call to your unit, where your unit had to go to Afghanistan and you were doing your duty, and then you came around and had to go again. And sometimes there is a bit of cloudiness with the employer about whether or not that is a true recall, or you enjoyed being in uniform and you volunteered to go again. Though I will have to say, in the Army Reserve, because of the great number of civil affairs individuals that we have, depending on what your skill set might have been, is that you may have deployed more than your other types of peer, maybe like a truck driver, just because of that unique skill set that you have in civil affairs that exists predominantly in the Army Reserve.
You talked a little bit ago about your favorite program. I'm curious, what's a program that you've been involved in that you're really the most proud of?
Well, I am proud of the Employer Partnership Office, just in general, because I think it's just a novel concept. And the Army Reserve started the Employer Partnership Office long before the Veterans Opportunity to Work Act and the requirement for individuals to have job transition training coming off of active duty. The original vision of the Employer Partnership Office was truly to connect America's employers with the reserve members and to create that common understanding of what the families go through and what the sacrifices are. And as the environment has changed, we're changing the environment of the Employer Partnership Office. So it is now becoming more focused on the job skills and the creating the connection in the resume and the interview skills. It's expanded out to the spouse program. General Talley may have talked a little bit about his private-public partnership initiative, in which he further wants to use the public sector and the private sector in order to help continue to enhance the skills of our reserve members so that they stay marketable and employable and good members of their community. Just one more thing is we had talked about in terms of the parenting and the outreach, because we talked a great deal about the outreach and in what we're trying to do with our employers. But we also have a new program within our child, youth, and school services where the Army Reserve is doing outreaches with local schools. And as you alluded to about having just that one person in that school, is that we are reaching out to those communities that don't have a large military population and helping schools understand what the military children are going through during the employment period or the absence of their parent for reserve duty.
So it's dealing how the kids can help each other and support each other, not just pen pal kinds of things with the deployed soldier.
Correct, how the kids can help each other, but also how the school itself, the teachers and the administrators, so that they have an understanding that they've got a child in school, or perhaps several children, depending on where the unit came from, that are deployed, and just to have an awareness that is going on, and so that they may understand better some of the behaviors of the child in school and be able to help them along a little bit better while their parent is deployed.
Brigadier General Tammy Smith, the Director of Human Capital for the U.S. Army Reserve, thank you very much for talking with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.